WMEL.
That's the sound of the 1951 Ford Victoria Hot Rod, fully restored and donated from the private collection of A.J. Hires. It's the 2017 Win the Classic Ford Car Raffle to support Helping Seniors of Brevard. You have to see this car. I'm Kerry Fink, and I'm inviting you to visit helpingseniors.brevard.org for full information on this exciting car raffle. That's helpingseniors.brevard.org. Stay tuned for more info on the Talk to Me radio network. We're glad that WMEL cares about the space and Treasure Coast.
The views expressed on the following program are those of the hosts, callers, and guests, and are not necessarily those of WMEL staff, management, or advertisers.
This is Joe Steckler, folks, your host for Helping Seniors, the radio arm of the Helping Seniors organization. Our job is to inform, educate, and connect seniors and those who care for seniors with resources that are needed to help them age with dignity. You know, there's a lot that goes on this radio show and our organization itself about information that is extremely valuable. And my guest today is Bill Johnson, who is an elder law attorney. And I wish many times that what Bill and I talk about often before the show, during the breaks, and after the show that we could put on the air, but sad to say we can't do that. But I wish we could, because I think it might sometimes offer many more of you of a different insight into the way things happen. But I do want to mention one thing before Bill and I start our show today, that there's a lot of change going on in Washington, D.C., and the man, General Kelly, that is the new chief of staff in the White House. I've met the man personally, and sometimes it helps people to know if somebody knows somebody and maybe how they think, how they react to things. And the time that I met General Kelly was when he was conducting the ceremony for my son-in-law to get his second star as an Air Force general. And Terry and I went down to Miami for the meeting, and our son-in-law was a deputy, like the chief of staff is to General Kelly at the time. The same thing that General Kelly now is to our president. And I want you to know that General Kelly is really a straight shooter, folks. He's a four-star general. He lost a son in Afghanistan. He knows, he's been through the wars himself. He's a 45-year career man. But he's really easy to talk to. He's stern. He's disciplined. He knows what he's doing. And I was listening to a couple of radio shows over the last couple of days, and people were just simply amazed that people could just walk into the White House and not have access control and just put anything on the president's desk that they wanted to. Well, this is probably one of the reasons that we've been operating in such chaos. But I think that General Kelly will straighten some of that out. And if he can't straighten out, I don't think General Kelly will stay there, because that's not the type of person he is. He is a good person, and he is an honest person, and he's a person, if you look him in the eye and he says yes, it's what he means, yes. And if he says no, he means no. So I just thought that little dissertation might help you as you try to understand what's going on in Washington and the White House. So I look for good things, maybe some better things to happen with somebody that's in charge of some aspect of our government right now, because whoever can control what the president sees plays a great part in what's happening, folks. And I can say that from my own experience, because I served as chief of staff to a couple of senior admirals. So I know how it runs and how it works. But it was just something I just wanted you to know. And we'll get on with our show today, but just remind everybody that we have a lot of sponsors that pay for this show and make our way possible. And some of those sponsors include Seniors Helping Seniors, Bill Johnson, elder law attorney, who is my panelist today, Dr. Lee Sheldon, who is a periodontist, the Eye Institute, a whole group of organizations, and they're all listed on our organization, helpingseniors.brevard.org. Please, if you haven't done so, take a look on the internet and see what we do. tell your friends about it. Our raffle for the 1951 Ford Victoria is on the air, and it's important that we do well on the raffle because that's one of the ways we pay for our program. So having said all that today and taking a lot of time up, Bill, the topic that you wanted to talk about today was retirement planning. And folks, when Bill and I were before the show, I said, Bill, I pulled up retirement planning on the internet. I said everything I talked about retirement planning had to do with financial advisors, and Bill said something like, "What did you say, Bill?"
That's right.
That's right.
I would agree with that. They did a study in Money Magazine. Not a study, but they took a survey of people getting ready to retire, and they asked what are your top 20 issues about retirement, and like the top 10 were all about money. Am I going to have enough money to retire? Am I going to be able to maintain the standard of living I have? It all centered around retirement, but and finances, but they never looked at anything else. And, way down the list was long-term care. What happens if I get sick? And, other things were quite a ways down the list.
The things that cost a lot of money.
Well, yes, that can change all those things all above.
Right.
So, I would like to expand people's definition. When we talk about retirement, everybody thinks about, I'm going to quit working and now I have to go into savings and get my Social Security, and everybody thinks money, but there's a lot of other things that you need to consider besides money. One being, health care. Another being, getting your legal documents in place. So you have to not only deal with the financial, but you have to deal with the legal and the health end of things.
Well, Bill, if people consider what you're talking about in the right way, and they do that 15 or 20 years before, even more than that, before they retire, and we do what we call estate planning, which is retirement planning, but you're right. People need to understand all the aspects of it, because if you do the planning the right way, you'll have, if you got any kind of luck at all, you'll have enough money to subsist you in retirement.
Well, let's talk about estate planning. Everybody should have a will, but they should also have documents that are covering them. What happens if they become incapacitated? They should have a durable power of attorney who would manage their finances. They should have a health care surrogate who's going to make the health care decisions. They should also have a living will, what their end-of-life decisions are, because if you're getting to retirement age, there is a greater likelihood that you can be hit with an acute illness. And, we look at people who have dementia, which is a very growing trend amongst our senior population, Parkinson's, strokes, heart attacks, all kinds of things that can disable them. And they need to have people in place to cover them in the event this happens. And obviously they also, in the event they pass on, need to have their estate planning in order so that their estate goes properly either to their spouse, children, or their other relatives or whoever their heirs may be. Now, the one thing we never talk about retirement is, most people are retiring. What age, Joe?
I'd say about 70.
Okay, 70, 65, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of those folks, if you're retiring at 65, you may have parents who are 83, 84, 85. So as you get closer to retirement age, your parents could be facing all kinds of long-term care situations. Like, are they able to stay at home? Or do they have to go to assisted living? Is there a nursing home involved? So part of your retirement years, you could end up being a caregiver for your parents.
But that's living longer.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't think about that. One of my employees is going to have to retire here early because she's got to go help take care of her husband's parents. So, that's not something a lot of people think about. You get all your ducks in a row, but then you do have parents who may not have all their ducks in a row. Do they have long-term care insurance? If your parents, something happens to them, how are we going to pay for a long-term plan? I get so many people to say, oh, we'll just have them move in with us. And then about 5 years later, they're like, oh, I can't take this anymore. or the parents have regressed where they can't be taken care of in the house. And then we're looking at placing them somewhere, and then, of course, the question comes up, who's going to pay for this? Who's going to pay? I had an attorney today tell me a phone call they received. It's an elder law attorney. And the phone call was from a gentleman who said, my wife was supposed to call you about doing some planning for her mother who needs long-term care, and she has not called to make the appointment, and quite frankly, I'm sick and tired of my paycheck paying for her care every month. So I'm calling to make the appointment for them.
So, has an attorney called?
No, that is the son-in-law.
Oh, okay.
Calling to make an appointment for his wife because he doesn't want to keep paying for his mother-in-law's long-term care bill.
But how is... Okay, you bring up he makes a couple. Who do he think's going to pay for it?
Well, he doesn't want to pay for it anymore. The point was he was making an appointment for them to figure out what their options are.
Okay. But you get a lot of cases like that. I would imagine you get a lot of cases like that when people don't have any options.
Well, I imagine in his case he wants his mother-in-law to pay for her care. But for one reason or another, I'm gathering that she doesn't have any resources.
And if she doesn't have a resource to pay for care,
then they need to explore public benefits. And that was the point of his call is, I'm paying for it, and I'm giving up my retirement, paying for the care of my mother-in-law. And they need to look into options.
Well, that's a problem that, and I have faced that over the 30 years that I've been working with senior citizens bill. I know that I've watched people take their entire retirement and spend it on the care, say, of their wife. One gentleman I can think put his wife in one of the best places here in Melbourne, and he used over $300,000. He had a comfortable retirement, but he took every bit of his retirement money and he used it to take care of his wife.
Well, let's just so the folks out there listening in get an idea of this. Here in Brevard County, a nursing home costs what, Joe?
$9,000 a month.
Yep, $9,000 a month, folks. Unless you got that kind of money to pay each and every month, you're going to go broke very quickly. What about an assisted living, Joe?
The average is $5,000.
The average is $5,000. Usually you start about $3,600 for room and board, but then you have to pay for all the assistance.
Right. Which
can be anywhere from $0 to another $2,000 or $3,000. So, that's a huge amount of money every week. I mean, every month in, month out. So, when you're retiring, you need to think about how you're going to pay for something like that, because that can wipe out your retirement fund very quickly. And you also, if you have elderly parents, you better figure out how they're going to pay for it if something should happen to them.
Well, the situation's become one, Bill, where you're not just planning in retirement planning. You're not planning just for yourself. You're planning for a whole family. In this case,
true.
And that's what's causing the problem, because if let's say, in my case, my wife's parents are passed away, but I know that if something would have happened that her father needed care, that we would have paid for it. And I know we would have done that because, and a lot of families do that. But there are many, many families that won't do that.
Or can't afford to do that.
Can't afford, well, even if they want to, they don't have the money to do it. Even no matter what it would cost, they don't have the extra money to do it. So it gets into the situation where you put them, they're almost forced into a nursing home because there are no really Medicaid funds to pay for that assisted living facility care for most people.
Or they have to be on a waiting list too long and they can't wait for the care.
Right. So they end up in a nursing home and a type of care that they really don't need, and in many cases, and it's sad to say, it's totally lacking. And I'm not going to deny it. Some places I wouldn't want to put a dog in. I mean, I don't like saying that, but it's true.
And the one thing we haven't talked about is in this planning process of making sure there's a plan for your parents and plan for yourself. Our example here was, we were talking about a family that may not have the resources to pay $9,000 or $10,000 a month for a nursing home, or $5,000 a month for assisted living. And so who were we looking to pay the bill, Joe?
Government?
Yeah, Medicaid, right?
Medicaid.
Well, what are they talking about in Washington, D.C. right now?
Talking about cutting Medicaid.
Cutting down Medicaid. So if that's your plan, it may not be a plan if something gets passed and they cut down Medicaid.
Well, this is one of the more reasons, Bill, that I think that the average citizen really doesn't understand all the care options. We don't, and I think about what somebody said to me in 2005 when we started the newspaper column about Helpline for Seniors. He said, "What are you ever going to find to talk about after 7 or 8 columns in the paper?" I said, "My guy, you'll always have something to talk about because there's always going to be issues that the times are going to change, and you have to adapt to all this stuff." Lord, there's so many issues even right now that I don't know how to give somebody a complete concrete answer to it, Bill.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I think you and me have talked about this, that we are going to have generations of impoverished seniors now because we have done away in America with pensions, and we have turned people over to 401ks, and these 401ks are all underfunded. I think 75% of 401ks are underfunded. 44% of Americans have zero in savings, absolutely no savings. And, when you start adding these things up, we're going to have homeless seniors. We're going to have a real big problem down the road.
And they're estimating that the brunt of that is going to hit about 2030. And we're 12, 13, 14 years away from that right now. It's not that far off. And, I was told many years ago that if you put a certain amount of money in your savings plan, and your pension type things, you'll have a certain amount of money when you retire. That's true. We were I was in my middle 40s when I was able to start. I would love to have started earlier, but those were the days when you had 15 and 16% home mortgages, and it was with that kind of mortgage, pretty hard to start a savings plan if you're trying to buy a home to live. But still, we've been able to just about triple our investments, so we're pretty comfortable for retirement. And I'm fortunate; I have my Navy retirement and Social Security.
I just read a wonderful article about people who are saving with 401ks. The company says we'll match your 3%, so the person saves each check that comes in. They put away 3%. The company matches their 3%. But that's not enough. They think they're saving. They're not. They need to be putting away 14, 15% of their income. The default on most 401ks is 3%. And people think that is set up so they have this false sense of security that they've been saving all along, when they really should have been putting 4 times as much.
That, and another problem that we never really mention this on radio or talk about it that much. We just use the broad term Social Security. A lot depends on how many hours you worked and what you worked at and what you put into the Social Security as to how much you get out of it. If you get a wife that didn't work and her husband had a poor paying job, she might and he passed away, and her Social Security might be $600 or $700 a month, and not $2,000 a month.
Right.
So,
I have widows who have Social Security checks of $300 and $400.
And how many of those widows do you always ask a question if their husband's retired military?
I usually ask that question.
And the reason I mention that because if they're retired military and they have not remarried, there's I would say 98% of the time they'd be eligible for roughly $1,100 a month from the federal government.
If they have a medical need. I'm talking about ladies without medical needs.
Oh, okay.
No, they're mostly living in those senior HUD housing. They just don't have any income. And something, I think it's like in 2032, or 2030, somewhere around there, half our income, our Social Security check, will go to medical expenses. Actually, I think that's in 20-something coming up.
Why will half our check go to medical expenses?
Co-pays and other things, drugs, prescription drugs.
How in the world, Bill, do people find out about what the heck we're talking about? We talk about we call the thing retirement planning. And I mentioned the first thing I said was that most people think about financial strategies when they talk about retirement planning. But when we come back on the other side of that, we're going to take a break in just a few seconds, folks. But what you really need to think about, what Bill and I are talking about, is that there's more to retirement planning than just thinking about how much money are you going to have, because there are a lot of strategies that you can implement when you're in your 20s, 30s, and 40s that will help you to have what you need. And with that thought, let's just take our mid-show break. We'll be back in about 2.5 minutes. Stay with us. This is Jeff Steckler, folks. We're back live with the second half of the show. I hope that you're enjoying what Bill and I are talking about, because it's certainly advice, and it should develop a thought process that you should be thinking about in terms of retirement planning. It's something that it's never too late to start either, and that's the key word. You got to develop an action plan somewhere around this thing to make it work for you. But having said that, just remember that Helping Seniors has an office and a phone line at 473-7770, and Kay Kaiser is our information specialist. And you can call Kay if you've got a question about what Bill and I are talking about. And if she doesn't know the answer, she'll get you pointed in the right direction. So that's the big thing about our organization. It helps people get started in solving the problem. And some of the organizations that help us are Barbara McIntyre, who is a home equity specialist. And I've been reading a lot of things in the paper. Just in 4 days, last 3 days, been talking a lot more about what a home equity loan can do for you. And, they're up to now where you can get up to $625,000. And there's a plan that Obama put into effect that I didn't know anything about it, and I'm going to be asking Barbara about it, because it's something that I'm going to ask her to write an article for in our Helping Seniors newsletter, because it does an awful lot to open up new streams of funding that you can use. That it won't hurt the equity on your home. It won't. You still live in the home, and you're not in danger of losing your home. And it's just a way that you can help make money for yourself in retirement. And that's what Bill and I are talking about today. But other organizations that you really need to think about are like the Eye Institute, Canadian Meds of Melbourne, Ear Care, Vitas Hospice. All of us have to think about a hospice program someday. We have Veterans Realty of Brevard. Joe Roth, the guy over there, I've had him on radio and TV, and he offers some really smart things that we should think about, just like when we talk about retirement planning. It's not just finances, Bill. There's a lot more to it than that. And with that thought, Bill had a couple of things that he wanted to bring up, and well, I'll just mention it personally because we're talking about long-term care. Somebody asked me one time after we'd done a show, is that all you talk about is long-term care? Well, if we've made a point with somebody that convinced them they should think about long-term care, then we've accomplished something, Bill.
I would agree with that. A lot of times I think you and me are both proponents of long-term care insurance. And, I get a lot of people who, for one reason or another, don't want to, even if, they can qualify, but they don't want to pay for long-term care. And, if you're going to rely on Medicaid to pay the bills for your long-term care, just realize, as we were talking about earlier, that the government can turn that spigot off at some point. And in Florida, at least, if you're trying to get home health care or assisted living care from Medicaid, you may have a wait. That line is getting longer and longer every year. And, it's usually at least a 6-month wait for services. So if your idea of long-term care is you're going to have services brought to you in your house, well, if you really want to stay home, long-term care insurance may be one of the few ways that you can actually guarantee that.
Well, to just sort of back up what you said, 8 months ago we had 52,000 people on a long-term care waiting list for the Medicaid payments here in Florida. And then when Governor Scott decided he wasn't going to take the expansion plan for Medicaid, that number jumped up to 64,000 overnight. So, there are numbers, folks, that you need to be better informed about. And that's what I've been trying to do in my articles in the paper recently, is to try to bring to your attention some of the things. We have agencies that receive government funding to provide services to you, yet their overhead costs are so enormous that the actual amount of services going out to you are minimalized. And that's, if you really knew the truth about it, you wouldn't like it. It's just like somebody called our office yesterday and said that they were really upset that I think it was AT&T had given a small donation to United Way. And why are they giving it to United Way instead of to a senior program? Well, how would AT&T know which senior program to give it to in the first place? And most people like to think that if I give my money to United Way, it's going to go for a good cause. Generally speaking, it does, and I can't refute that. But I can say that United Ways don't operate today the same as they did 10 years ago. Part of that has been brought about because of reduced funding, but still, United Way boards are not as open to looking into what potential problems could be. We don't do a good job, Bill, of really looking into what our seniors need. And one of the reasons for that is we don't have a senior leadership, and it's one of the reasons that we have the problem that you and I are talking about today. We do not have effective senior leadership.
Yeah, in Florida we used to have the silver-haired legislature, and Claude Pepper was a champion of the seniors' issues in Florida, and, we haven't had that in a long, long time.
Yes, it went away.
Yeah, we still have the silver-haired legislature, but you don't even hear about them anymore.
No, they folded up.
They folded up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't exist. And if it does, somebody correct me, because I've been trying to figure out how we can do something about promoting senior leadership, and we've got an advocacy council that's going to meet on the 18th of August, folks. And if anybody is, give me a plug. If you want to be involved in senior issues, call Kay at the office at 473-7770 and tell her if you want to sit on the advocacy council. We'd be love to have you, because if we don't start doing a better job of taking care of ourselves, nobody's going to do it for us.
The other thing I wanted to talk about when people are retiring, we talked about their legal documents and getting their power of attorney in place and things like that. And, if you don't do these legal documents ahead of time, and we need to, access your assets to pay for your care, and you haven't given anybody that authority, we have to go do what's called a guardianship. And we go to court and have somebody appointed as your guardian, giving them the power to manage your health care and finances, but stripping all those duties and rights away from you, which is a very invasive procedure. So everybody should, as you're getting to retirement, if not before, have these documents done so that if something does happen to you medically, these documents are in place. Now, this is especially true if you are someone who is in a second marriage and has children from a prior marriage. I do litigation. I litigate in wills and trusts. I litigate in guardianships. And I can tell you 90% of my litigation is a new spouse and children from a prior marriage fighting over who gets to make decisions for the parent other spouse because they have had a catastrophic health event. And we fight it out in guardianship court, or if they've passed, we may fight it out in the form of a will contest or a trust contest. But if you have a second marriage, and even if you have a prenuptial agreement, that still doesn't stop people from using undue influence on people to change their documents
and get into court fights.
Yeah. So, just because somebody has a prenuptial document, don't assume that their will has not been changed, because most prenuptials say, what's mine's mine, what's yours, unless, in my will I leave it to you. So unless you know what that person's will says, that whole prenuptial could be have an end run done on it.
Yeah. In this day and age, Bill, when people talk about savings and estate planning, but you start talking about a guardianship, I'm going to, it's sort of like an off-the-wall guess on my part. I would say that there are many, many, many people that have estates that are worth well over $1 million. Many people, right here in Broward County.
Yeah, I would say there are quite a few, but I don't see a ton of those, which is interesting. But
okay, let's say somebody's got an estate, counting their house and everything, worth between $500,000 and $1 million.
There's a lot of those.
There's a lot of those. And if you get into a contested case in court, you could easily spend $100,000.
Correct.
So, but I don't think people think about that when they start saying, well, I want to get what's mine out of this, so, but they end up spending $100,000 or $150,000 in court costs.
And some of those are the most bitter disputes. People, there's a saying that there's two ways for attorneys to get shot. One is doing divorce work, and the other is doing probate work. Those are the two ways, because that's when people's emotions are running really, really high.
Well, that's when all the meanness and that
spite,
and it gets out into the open. And once it starts, you just can't really turn it off. And once it starts, the people seem to forget it's costing them an arm and a leg, and they end up spending all their money trying to
fight over it.
And if they would have just simply put the right documents in place as part of their retirement planning,
and let everybody know this is the way it is, and had a meeting, of the family, and said, here's the documents, here's who gets what, this is what I want. Everybody's going to honor this.
Great. Let's talk about two things. I mentioned to Bill, folks, a lot of people, we use the word will and living will. We sort of bandy the term around a lot. Bill, explain to people, our listening audience, what exactly is the difference between a will and a living will?
A will or last will and testament is a document whereby you devise or give your estate to somebody upon your death. And a will is going to cover assets that go through probate. That being assets that aren't jointly held, don't have a beneficiary on them, or are not in a trust. So any assets that meet that criteria, they're not jointly owned, not in a trust, and don't have a beneficiary, those are going to pass through probate, and your will is going to determine who gets what. So we marshal those assets together, pay off your debts, and then in your will you've named somebody as what we call a personal representative. That's Florida's word for executor, and that person is in charge of doing that. The court signs off on it, basically, and then we distribute the assets at the end. So that is the probate process, where the will is admitted to court, muster the assets, pay the debts, and then distribute to the heirs.
Okay.
Versus a living will, which is a health care document, what we call an advance directive, whereby you spell out ahead of time what your wishes are should you be incapacitated and in either a terminal condition, an end-stage condition, or a persistent vegetative state, whether or not you want life support continued. Also, you usually note whether or not you want the artificial administration of food and water, a feeding tube, in any of those circumstances. So a living will is actually a health care directive, and a last will and testament is your estate document.
Okay. Another thing that comes up when we talk about it, we talk about irreconcilable and irreconcilable trust.
No, irrevocable.
Irrevocable. Well, we might be able to...
A revocable trust is commonly used in estate planning to avoid probate. You create a trust, which is a contract, and you agree to put your assets in the control of somebody called a trustee. And when they take control of your assets, they agree to be bound by the terms of the trust. And then, and usually you're the trustee initially. And then if you become incapacitated or die, a successor trustee steps up and manages the assets on your behalf if you're still alive, or if you've deceased, then they would pay your debts and distribute the assets out to your heirs. Revocable means that it can be amended or revoked at any time by the person who made it.
Before they die.
Correct. You know, they can revoke it unless they become incapacitated or are dead. A irrevocable trust is one where you lack the ability to amend or revoke the trust.
Why would somebody do that? I've asked you the question
usually before. They are used for very specific circumstances. In Medicaid planning, we use them a lot when we have to have certain kinds of trusts that have what we call Medicaid paybacks, like special needs trusts or qualified income trusts, where anything left in the trust when the person dies goes to Medicaid. You also use irrevocable trust a lot of time when we're dealing with estate taxes, and we want to move something out of your estate so it is not counted for estate tax purposes. And there's a whole variety of trusts that do that. And we, charitable remainder trusts, charitable lead trusts, irrevocable life insurance trusts, qualified personal residence trusts, a whole slew of these trusts that are used for purposes of moving something out of your estate.
Okay, let's say if I have a trust, and I'm still trying to think of if I want to change it from a revocable to an irrevocable trust. All this has to be done before you die, right? All this is while you're living.
Right.
So, but if somebody, if I said I wanted an irrevocable trust, then my wife and I would both have to sign it, right?
Well, it depends. If you created it was your trust, only you would sign it. If it is a joint trust, you and your wife would have to sign it.
But how could a married couple how could one partner in a marriage make an irrevocable trust that wouldn't affect the other partner?
They can do that. They can go out and make an irrevocable trust if they want. Happens all the time. I got money and I get married and I have a prenuptial agreement, and I want to create a trust that when I am gone, the money in this trust, my wife can use it, but upon her death, it's going to go to my kids. So I could create an irrevocable trust that says, upon my death, my wife can use the money in this trust, and then upon her death, it goes to my kids.
But then if you had a wife that didn't want that to happen, all she had to do is spend all the money.
Well, I don't put her in charge of the trust.
Holy
mackerel. Put my brother in charge of the trust.
So then the wife couldn't touch the money?
No, my brother could dole it out to my wife, give her all the income and whatever she needs for certain criteria, maybe health maintenance support, something like that. But upon her death, everything would go to my kids.
There's a lot to understand about some very simple words. That at times after you and I do a show, I'll drive home and I'll try to get my arms around what we talked about, and several times I've thought we've talked about revocable and irrevocable trust, and like I said, what did I use?
You said irreconcilable.
Irreconcilable.
Yeah.
I know better than that.
Irrevocable. I understand.
But those words sort of mean the same thing when you're talking about
well,
you can't reconcile something.
Irreconcilable is usually divorce.
Yeah. But when it goes back to even husbands and wives that have been married for years, when they go to do some of these things, my father and my mother went to an attorney and they did a trust, and my dad walked out of there and he told Mom that he said I had no idea that we had that kind of money. He just never thought about it.
Right.
Now, they weren't multimillionaires or anything like that. They were just comfortable people that have worked all their lives. They owned their home, had their cars, but they had some money in the bank. They saved some money. But they just didn't realize what they had. On the other hand, if we don't do a better job of planning for retirement, we're never going to have those kind of problems. We're going to have the problems about worrying what the hell is going to happen to us before they put us in the ground.
Right, and you have to really plan for, your estate planning, like you're talking about. Who gets what when I go? You have to worry about your incapacity planning. Who's going to make my decisions if something happens to me? And you're going to have to worry about your long-term care planning. What's the plan if I become ill and I can't no longer take care of myself?
Yeah, folks.
And that's all in addition to the financial planning that we talked about.
But we think about all the possessions that we have in our house. Terry and I have got, when the kids come down, we've asked them to go around the house and make a list out of the 10 items that they like most in the house, and then we'll see what they all come up with and see what we might have to be the arbitrator in who gets what. But one of our granddaughters had given us a list, and we just got to where she's going to be married, and she's engaged now. And one of the things she liked most was one of the paintings that Terry had done years ago. And so Terry says, I want to give her that painting now. So she took it down, had it safely wrapped at UPS, and shipped it, and got the bill. And so what the heck UPS charges to ship that damn painting? And it was amazing. But 2 days later, our granddaughter had a picture taken of her holding the painting with a smile on her face, and the thought that we were able to see what she thought of a painting that Terry had done 50-some years ago, that how much she really appreciated that piece of art. It made it more obvious to us that we needed to do a lot more thinking about it, because seeing the reaction of the children when they got something that they really, really liked instead of us never seeing the expression on her face.
Right.
But that's all part of planning. When we talk about retirement planning, one of the things, a key word you and I both talked about, we thought we'd close with this today, is that we're never going to have a really good plan of any kind, estate plan, retirement plan, or anything, unless we take action at some point. Sometimes you can take action sooner than later. What are Bill Johnson's thoughts about taking action on developing a retirement plan at some point in your life?
Oh, you definitely need to do that. You need to meet with somebody who does financial planning very early. Otherwise, you will not see the wonder of compound interest and the stock market accruing and the growth that you can get over your lifetime. You also need to get your legal documents done. I mean, 3 of the seminal cases on living wills, the Terry Schiavo case, the Nancy Cruzan case, and I can't remember the other one, but they were all people who were under 30 years old. So it's never too early to get your legal documents done. And then also, everybody should have a will at a minimum.
Yeah, and the one thing in the last very few seconds, just comment on what you consider the value of having a durable will or durable power of attorney.
You should have that to have somebody in place to make your financial decisions, as well as a healthcare surrogate for healthcare decisions.
So those are some of the important documents that people need to have, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Bill. I hope you listeners have enjoyed the show that Bill and I have just done for you, because I've certainly enjoyed it. I always learn something, and we'll see you here next week. Dr. Lee Shelton will be my guest. Dr. Shelton, the periodontist. See you next week. Bye-bye.